stepped off the transport shuttle and took his first breath of recycled alien air. The Galactic Academy of Unified Species floated in the darkness of space, a massive station that housed students from over 200 different worlds. Was 17 years old, loved video games, and had never expected to be the first human exchange student in galactic history. The welcome hall was enormous. Strange lights floated near the ceiling, and the walls seemed to breathe with some kind of living material. Tried not to stare at everything, but it was difficult. He had studied alien species in preparation for this trip, but seeing them in person was completely different. A group of students stood near the registration desk. They had scales that shifted colors based on their emotions, and right now those scales were turning a pale, frightened white. When walked past them, they pressed themselves against the wall as if he might attack at any moment. Smiled at them politely. 3 of them made small screaming sounds and ran away. He did not understand what he had done wrong. His assigned roommate was a gentle being named, had 4 arms, compound eyes, and a soft clicking voice. When entered their shared room, took one look at him, made a sound like breaking glass, and immediately contacted the housing office to request a transfer. Within an hour, had a room to himself. His older sister found him sitting alone in the empty room, staring at the wall. She was 19 and had arrived at the academy 2 weeks earlier as part of the senior exchange program. She sat down next to him and put her hand on his shoulder. "They think we are monsters," said quietly. Looked at her with confusion. "What do you mean? I have not done anything wrong." "It does not matter what we do. It matters what we are." Pulled out her tablet and showed him a document. It was the official Academy classification for humans. Category 7 threat species. Our eyes face forward like predators. We have teeth designed to tear meat. Our ancestors hunted animals by chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We sweat, which means we can run for hours without overheating. To every other species in this galaxy, we are walking nightmares. Read the document with growing disbelief. According to the Academy's research, humans came from a death world where almost everything was trying to kill them. They had survived ice ages, plagues, predators, and natural disasters. They had tamed wolves and turned them into pets. They had domesticated animals that could crush them with ease. They had spread across their entire planet and then reached for the stars. The document concluded that humans should be monitored at all times and kept separate from other students for safety reasons. "But I am vegetarian," said weakly. I told them the same thing. They said that only proves how unpredictable we are. The Academy had taken many precautions for the human students. His desk in every classroom was positioned in the far corner, surrounded by an invisible energy barrier. A faculty monitor named Counselor was assigned to follow him everywhere. Was a massive being covered in natural armor, standing 8 feet tall with arms like tree trunks, even seemed nervous around. Meals were served separately in a sealed room. The Academy was worried that other students would panic if they saw humans eating. When asked why, explained that most galactic species found the human digestive process disturbing. Apparently, the sounds of chewing were considered aggressive in most cultures. Tried very hard to make friends. In his first class, Introduction to Galactic Cultures, he waved at the student sitting nearest to him. The student, a small being made of floating crystals, immediately shattered into 1,000 pieces. The professor had to spend 20 minutes helping them reassemble. In Advanced Stellar Cartography, accidentally sneezed. The sound was sudden and loud in the quiet classroom. 3 students fainted. 1 student shed its entire outer shell in panic. Another student started secreting defensive toxins that required the room to be evacuated. Was asked to attend classes remotely for the rest of the week. He sat in his empty room, watching lectures on a screen, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. Back home he had friends. He had people who laughed at his jokes and invited him to play games. Here, He was treated like a dangerous animal that might attack at any moment. Visited him every evening. She had experienced the same isolation, the same fear from other students, but she had learned to cope with it. She told to be patient. She told him that eventually people would see that humans were not dangerous. "How long did it take for you?" asked. "Was quiet for a moment. I will let you know when it happens." Laughed, but it was not a happy sound. What neither of them knew was that the Academy's administrators had made a terrible mistake. They had been so focused on containing the human threat that they had ignored something much more dangerous. Deep beneath the Academy, in a vault that was older than most civilizations in the galaxy, something ancient was beginning to wake up. The vault had been built during the Void Wars, a conflict so terrible that most species had agreed to forget it ever happened. Inside the vault, held in stasis for over 10,000 years, was a creature called the Owl. It was a being of living shadow and endless hunger. It had consumed entire star systems before it was finally captured. 12 civilizations had sacrificed themselves to stop it, and even then they could not kill it. They could only put it to sleep. Now, a routine maintenance drone made a small error. A power cable was disconnected. Backup systems that should have activated had degraded to uselessness over the alarms that should have warned the Academy remained silent. In the darkness of the forgotten vault, the Owl opened its eyes. Above, in his lonely room, finished his homework and went asleep. He dreamed of home, of his grandmother's cooking, of playing games with his friends. He did not know that tomorrow would change everything. He did not know that tomorrow the Academy would learn what humans really were. Not monsters, not threats, something far more terrifying to the darkness that was rising from below. Survivors, the Owl had been sleeping for 12,000 years. In its dreams, it remembered the taste of stars. It remembered the screaming of civilizations as they fell into its darkness. It remembered being as a god of death by species that thought they could bargain with it. They had been wrong. Everything was food to the Owl. Everything would eventually be consumed. Now it was awake, and it was very, very hungry. The creature rose through the lower levels of the Academy like smoke rising from a fire. It moved through walls as if they were not there. Security systems tried to stop it, but they were designed for physical threats. The Owl was not physical in any normal sense. It was shadow given form, darkness given teeth, the empty space between stars made into something that could think and want and feed. Above, in the classroom building, was experiencing something wonderful. A small, fuzzy being named had sat within 3 desks of him. This was the closest any student had voluntarily come to since he arrived. Was round, covered in soft brown fur, and had 6 small eyes that blinked at different times. Right now, all 6 eyes were focused on with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Is it true," whispered their voice shaking, "that humans can run for many days without stopping?" Thought about the question. He had read about human persistence hunting in his preparation materials. His ancestors had indeed chased animals across vast distances until the animals collapsed from exhaustion, but himself got tired walking upstairs. "Some humans can do this," he admitted, "but I cannot. I get tired very quickly. I prefer to sit and play video games." Seemed to relax slightly. "You have lazy behaviors." "Very lazy, champion-level lazy." This admission made move one desk closer. Felt his heart warm. This was progress. This was the beginning of a friendship. Maybe things would get better after all. Then the floor shook. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a dim red glow. Professor, a crystalline being who taught introduction to galactic diplomacy, stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. "That is not possible," the professor said. Their voice harmonized with fear. "That vault has not been opened in 12,000 years." The wall behind his desk exploded. There was no warning, no sound before the impact. One moment the wall was there, solid and real. The next moment it was gone, and something was pouring through the gap like water flowing downhill, except this water was made of darkness and had too many eyes. Students screamed. The sound was terrible, a mixture of hundreds of different species all making their fear known in their own ways. The energy barrier around's desk flared bright blue for a moment, then collapsed and died. Counselor charged forward. The massive armored being had been assigned to protect the students from. Now was the only one brave enough to face the real threat. Raised a resonance weapon, a device that could shatter solid rock with concentrated sound waves. The owl swatted aside like a human might swat a fly. The counselor crashed through 2 walls and did not get up again. Sat very still at his desk. His body wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to find safety, to get as far away from this creature as possible. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst. His hands were shaking. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps. But something else was happening inside him too. Something older than fear. Something that had been passed down through thousands of generations of humans who had faced predators and survived. Was angry. He was angry at being treated like a monster for 2 weeks. He was angry at being isolated and feared and made to feel like something was wrong with him. He was angry that now, when a real monster appeared, everyone was too busy running away to notice that the exits were blocked. The owl turned its attention to the small human sitting at the corner desk. It was not used to prey that did not run. It was not used to prey that looked back at it with anything other than pure terror. It reached into his mind, tasting his thoughts, trying to understand this strange little creature. What it found there made it pause. The owl saw memories of a species that should not have survived, a species that lived on a planet where the ground shook and opened without warning, where water fell from the sky and flooded entire regions, where the air itself could become poison during volcanic eruptions, where predators with claws and fangs hunted in every environment. And yet humans had survived all of it. The owl saw deeper. It saw his grandmother, a woman who had lived through a terrible war. She had lost everything, her home, her family, her entire way of life, and she had rebuilt. She had raised children and taught them to never give up, no matter how dark things became. It saw his father, working 18 hours a day to give his children opportunities he never had. It saw his mother, fighting an illness that should have killed her, refusing to surrender even when the doctors said there was no hope. Humans, the owl realized, did not know how to give up. The creature had consumed countless species across thousands of years. Every single one of them, when faced with its overwhelming power, had eventually fallen into despair. They had stopped fighting. They had accepted their end. This small human was terrified. The owl could taste his fear like a sweet dessert. But underneath that fear was something the ancient creature had never encountered before. Defiance. "Get away from my classmates," said. His voice shook, but his words were clear. He grabbed his desk with both hands and lifted it like a weapon. "I do not know what you are, but this is my classroom now." The owl laughed. The sound was like metal tearing, like reality itself being ripped apart. It echoed through dimensions that humans could not perceive. "Little predator," it said, its voice filling his mind, "you interest me." In the doorway appeared. She was holding an emergency beacon in one hand and a fire extinguisher in the other. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her jaw was set with the same stubborn determination her brother showed. The owl looked between the 2 humans. It had not been challenged in 12,000 years. It had certainly never been challenged by beings so small and fragile. It decided to wait, to watch. These humans were something new. And the owl had not been entertained in a very, very long time. The classroom had become a place of complete chaos. Students climbed over each other trying to reach the exits, their scales flashing every color of fear, had curled into a tight ball on the floor, releasing clouds of distress chemicals that smelled like burned sugar. Professor had shattered into hundreds of crystal pieces, entering emergency hibernation mode. But did not run. He stood there with his desk raised above his head, facing a creature that had destroyed civilizations. His arms were shaking from the weight. His legs felt weak. Every part of his brain was screaming that this was insane, that he should drop the desk and run like everyone else. But his feet would not move. The owl loomed over him like a mountain made of nightmares. It was at least 12 feet tall, though its shape kept changing. Sometimes it had arms. Sometimes it had tentacles. Sometimes it was just a wall of darkness with too many teeth and too many eyes. It reached for with a limb of pure shadow. Swung the desk. The impact should have done nothing. The desk was made of lightweight materials designed for student comfort. Against a creature that had survived orbital bombardments and planet-killing weapons, it should have been meaningless, less than nothing. But the owl pulled back. Not because the desk hurt it. The desk could not hurt something like the owl. It pulled back because of what the attack meant. This tiny, soft, fragile creature had just tried to fight back. Not flee, not beg, fight. The owl was so surprised that it actually laughed again. "You are brave," it said inside its mind. "Brave and foolish. Do you know what I am, little predator?" His voice shook when he spoke. "Something that needs to leave. I am the owl. I have existed since before your species climbed down from trees. I have consumed stars. I have ended worlds. Civilizations that were ancient when your planet was still cooling from its formation tried to stop me and failed. I do not care," raised the desk again. "This is my classroom. These are my classmates. Leave." The owl reached deeper into his mind. It wanted to understand where this defiance came from. It had consumed millions of beings, and all of them had eventually accepted their fate. All of them had given up. It saw human history, wars that killed millions followed by rebuilding, plagues that wiped out half of populations followed by recovery, natural disasters that destroyed entire cities followed by reconstruction. Over and over, humans faced destruction and chose to continue. It saw something else too, humans hunting, not with claws or fangs because humans had neither. Humans hunting by walking, following prey for hours, for days, never stopping, never resting until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Humans were not the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. They were the most persistent. They simply refused to stop. "Fascinating," the owl said. "Your kind does not know despair." "We know despair," replied. "We just do not accept it." Moved closer to her brother. She still held the fire extinguisher, though she knew it would be useless against this creature. But she could not let face this alone. "Whatever you want," she said to the darkness, "you cannot have it. We will not let you." The owl's attention shifted to her. Another human. Same strange defiance, same refusal to accept the obvious truth that they were completely outmatched. "You cannot stop me," it said. "Your weapons cannot harm me. Your technology cannot contain me. I am eternal. I am inevitable." "Maybe," said, "but we are stubborn." The creature was silent for a long moment. Around them, the chaos continued. Students fled through whatever exits they could find. Emergency alarms finally began to sound, filling the station with noise. Security teams were being mobilized, though they would be useless against the owl. But in this corner of the classroom, time seemed to have stopped. The ancient horror and the two young humans faced each other in a strange standoff. "I will not kill you," the owl finally said. "Not yet. You have made me curious, little predators. I want to understand your species. I want to see what you will do when true hopelessness arrives." It began to expand, its darkness spreading through the walls like ink through water. Within minutes, it had sealed off an entire section of the academy. Emergency shields slammed into place, containing the creature but also trapping over 300 students and faculty inside with it. Lowered his desk, his arms were aching and his heart was still racing, but he was alive, Everyone in the classroom was still alive. Uncurled slowly, all 6 eyes blinking at with wonder. You challenged it. You challenged the shadow and it listened. It did not listen, said. It just decided to wait. That is more than anyone has achieved in 12,000 years. Counselor groaned from the rubble of the broken walls. The armored being was badly damaged but alive. They looked at with new eyes. We classified you as a threat, said weakly. We were right, but we misunderstood the nature of the threat. What do you mean? Asked. You are not dangerous because you might hurt us. You are dangerous because you do not know how to surrender. You face impossible situations and keep fighting anyway. Coughed, green fluid leaking from cracks in their armor. That is more frightening than claws or fangs. Helped sit down. His legs finally gave out and he collapsed into a chair. The adrenaline was fatting and exhaustion was taking its place. What do we do now? He asked his sister. Looked at the darkness surrounding them. The owl was everywhere, watching, waiting. 300 beings were trapped in this section of the academy with no way out and no way to call for help. We survive, she said. That is what humans do. We survive until we find a way to win. The owl heard her words. For the first time it felt something other than hunger. It felt interested. 3 days passed inside the containment zone. The Academy's emergency protocols had activated automatically when the owl escaped its vault. Massive energy shields now surrounded the diplomatic wing, designed to contain threats until help could arrive. The shields were strong enough to hold back warships. They were also strong enough to trap 300 students and faculty inside with an ancient horror. Communications were down. The owl's presence disrupted faster-than-light signals, making it impossible to call for help. Rescue ships were on their way, but they would take at least 5 days to arrive, maybe longer. Inside the containment zone, 2 humans had taken charge. Set up a medical station in the largest classroom. She had only basic training from her exchange program preparation, but that was more than anyone else had. She treated cuts, bruises, broken bones, and panic attacks. Some species entered shock when frightened and needed specific treatments to recover. Others released dangerous chemicals when stressed and had to be isolated. Learned quickly, making mistakes but never giving up. Became something unexpected, a leader. The owl continued to watch him with special interest. It never attacked when was nearby. It never consumed anyone who stayed close to the human. Slowly, the trapped survivors realized that was the safest place in the entire containment zone. Students who had fled from him in terror now gathered around his desk, refused to leave his side, becoming an unofficial assistant. Even Counselor, still healing from their injuries, positioned themselves near. I do not understand this, said a student named. Their scales had stopped changing colors, settling into a calm blue that matched their resignation. We feared you for being a predator. Now you protect us from something far worse. Did not know how to respond. He did not feel like a protector. He felt like a scared teenager who wanted to go home and play video games and eat his grandmother's cooking. But he also could not sit by and do nothing while people suffered. Humans are not special, he said to the gathered survivors. We are weak compared to most of you. We have no armor, no venom, no natural weapons, but we have survived on our planet by helping each other. When one of us falls, others pick them up. When disaster strikes, we rebuild together. That is the only thing we know how to do. The owl listened to these words. It drifted closer, its darkness surrounding the group like a blanket of living shadow. But it did not attack. It had promised to wait, and an ancient being like the owl always kept its promises. Little predator, it said to when the others were sleeping, I have questions. Was exhausted. He had not slept properly in 3 days. His body ached, his mind was foggy, and he wanted nothing more than to close his eyes and forget all of this was happening. But he also knew that keeping the owl talking was keeping everyone alive. Ask, he said. Why do you continue? Blinked, continue what? Everything. Your species exists on a world that constantly tries to kill you. Earthquakes, floods, diseases, predators. You have every reason to despair. Yet you build cities that fall down and then build them again. You fight wars that destroy everything and then rebuild. Why? Thought about the question. It was not something he had ever considered before. Persisting through hardship was simply what humans did. It was as natural as breathing. Because giving up means the end, he finally said. And we are not ready for the end. There is always more to do, more to see, more to experience. If we give up when things are hard, we never get to see what comes next. Everything ends eventually. Your sun will die, your species will vanish. The universe itself will grow cold and empty. Why fight against the inevitable? Because the fighting is what matters, the struggle is the point. Even if we lose in the end, the time we spend trying means something. Every moment of joy, every act of kindness, every beautiful thing we create, those are real. They happened. The universe might forget, but they still happened. The owl was silent for a long time. Could feel it thinking, processing his words in ways that a human mind could not understand. I have consumed civilizations that were ancient when your world was young, it finally said. They had philosophies, they had beliefs, but none of them spoke like you. None of them found meaning in the struggle itself. Maybe that is why they did not survive. Perhaps. The conversation ended, but something had shifted. The owl's presence felt different, less hungry, more contemplative. Found the next morning, sitting alone and staring at the darkness. You are talking to it, she said. It was not a question. Yes. Is it working? Shrugged, I do not know. It has not killed anyone. That has to count for something. Sat down next to him. They were both exhausted, both scared, both completely out of their depth. But they were also still alive, still fighting, still human. Dad would be proud of you, she said quietly. Laughed weakly. Dad would tell me I should have studied harder and become a doctor instead of getting trapped with an ancient space monster. That too. They sat together as the artificial light cycled to simulate morning. Around them, 300 beings began to wake up, facing another day of captivity and fear. But they were facing it together, united by circumstances and by the two young humans who refused to give up. The owl watched all of this with growing fascination. It had consumed countless worlds, but it had never observed one quite like this. These small, fragile, stubborn creatures were teaching it something new. The question was whether it would learn the lesson before the rescue fleet arrived. Because when the fleet came, decisions would have to be made, and the owl was not yet sure what it would decide. On the 5th day, the rescue fleet arrived. 12 warships from 8 different species surrounded the academy. Their weapons were charged and ready. Their commanders had studied the ancient records about the owl. They knew that conventional weapons could not kill it, but they also knew that enough firepower could slow it down, maybe even force it back into hibernation. The cost would be high. The containment zone would be destroyed completely. Everyone inside, 300 students and faculty, including 2 humans, would die. But it was considered an acceptable price to prevent the owl from escaping into the wider galaxy. Inside the containment zone, felt the change in the owl's mood. They are here, the ancient creature said. Your rescuers. They plan to sacrifice this entire section to stop me. Had expected this. He had spent 5 days learning about the owl, understanding its history, trying to figure out if there was any way to end this without more death. He had come to one conclusion. The owl was lonely. It was a strange thing to realize about a creature that had consumed civilizations. But underneath the hunger, underneath the power, the owl was desperately, terribly alone. It had existed for millions of years with nothing but prey, nothing to talk to, nothing to challenge it, nothing to make existence interesting. And then 2 human teenagers had stood up to it with a desk, and a fire extinguisher. "They will destroy this place," said. "Everyone inside, including you." "I could escape," the owl replied. "I could break through their fleet like paper. I could resume my feeding across the galaxy. A few warships cannot stop me." "But you have not done that." "No, I have not." "Why?" The owl's form shifted, considering the question. Around them, the other survivors held their breath, stood at her brother's side, ready to face whatever came next, clung to his leg, trembling but refusing to leave. Counselor had positioned themselves to shield as many students as possible, knowing it would be useless but doing it anyway. "You asked me earlier why humans continue when everything seems hopeless," the owl finally said. "You told me the struggle is the point. The fighting matters even if you lose." "Yes. I have never struggled. I have never fought anything that could truly challenge me. I have only consumed. For millions of years I have only taken. There was never any risk, never any uncertainty, never any reason to try." Understood suddenly. The owl was not just lonely. It was bored. Existence without challenge was meaningless. Power without limits was empty. "You could change," said. "You do not have to consume. You could find another purpose. You would trust me, after everything I have done, after everything I am." "Trust is a choice, so is change. What do you choose?" The moment stretched forever. Outside, the fleet commanders were preparing their final assault. Inside, 300 beings waited to learn their fate. And in the center of it all, a human teenager faced an ancient horror and asked it to be better. "Your species is strange," the owl said. "You should hate me, fear me, want me destroyed. Instead, you offer me a chance. Hating you would not change anything. Fearing you would not save anyone. But maybe understanding you could make a difference. Maybe finding common ground could create something new." Common ground, with a creature that has consumed worlds. Everyone can change, everything can grow. That is what life means. Standing still is just dying slowly. The owl laughed, but this time the sound was different. Less like tearing metal, more like genuine amusement. "Very well, little predator. I will try something different." Its massive form began to change. The darkness compressed, folding in on itself, becoming smaller and denser. What had been a creature 12 feet tall slowly became a sphere of contained shadow no larger than a human head. The weight of its presence remained, but the overwhelming hunger faded. "I will observe," the owl said. "I will learn. I will try to understand why your species finds meaning in struggle and persistence. Perhaps your strange philosophy has value." Reached out and took the sphere in his hands. It was cold, impossibly cold, but it did not harm him. The owl had chosen to be held, chosen to be contained, chosen to trust. Counselor stared with disbelief. "The containment field is down, the entity is passive." The message reached the fleet. Weapons powered down. The commanders could not believe their readings, but the evidence was clear. The owl had surrendered voluntarily. Emergency teams flooded the station. Medical personnel treated the injured. Counselors helped the traumatized. And in the middle of it all, 2 young humans walked out of the diplomatic wing carrying an ancient horror between them like a precious treasure they had found. The incident would be classified at the highest levels. The reports would note that a Category 7 species, humans, had successfully negotiated with a Category Omega entity. It was the first recorded instance of such diplomacy in galactic history. But the real change was smaller and more personal. 1 week later, returned to classes. His desk was no longer isolated behind energy barriers. Students sat near him willingly, some even eagerly, claimed the seat directly next to his and refused to give it up for anything. And on his desk, in a specially designed containment unit that the owl could leave at any time if it chose, the ancient creature of darkness attended its first lesson, in Introduction to Galactic Diplomacy. Professor, fully reassembled and only slightly traumatized, did their best to ignore the shadow watching from the corner. Today we will discuss conflict resolution between species with different value systems, the professor said. Can anyone give an example? Raised his hand. The universe, as it turned out, was much more interesting when you stopped trying to consume it and started trying to understand it instead. And somewhere in the back of the classroom, an entity that had once ended civilizations was learning what it meant to be part of one.